Oh, very good. One concurrent viewer. Before 30 seconds of going live, thank you for coming so promptly. It is through lurking around in Telegram groups, white nationalist Telegram groups, that I discovered that Kevin MacDonald had written another book. It was through Guide to the Culture that I discovered this. And yesterday I think I was removed because I wanted to discuss it, and nobody wanted to discuss it with me. And they wanted me to buy the book, obviously, and read it, and I certainly wasn't going to do it, because I think if you're literate enough, you can tell just by reading from the extracts that it's not going to be much cop. But anyway, if you want to get hold of a copy, you can get it on Amazon, and it's 22 quid. $22 and 48 cents. And $5.99 to buy. Let me see if I can get it from what's the price in the UK? Annoyingly, Amazon signs you out if you don't buy stuff from it, and then it means you have to call them, and then you have to get a new thing. I guess that's a way they punish you. Anyway, I can't tell how much it costs in the UK. But anyway, I have discovered that Kevin MacDonald has written a new book. It was published in 2019, and it's called Individualism in the Western Liberal Tradition, Evolutionary Origins, History and Prospects for the Future. And why do I think it's rubbish? Well, listen to the blurb. It's a short one, but you can tell that, it's incoherent. And it doesn't fit with my theory, which is, easy to remember and easy to explain to others. So obviously, Kevin MacDonald is making himself out to be a sage. He is, after all, an academic who calls himself an evolutionary psychologist. He testified at David Irving's trial against Deborah Lipstadt. So MacDonald was asked by Irving, who served as his own defence counsel, if he, Irving, was an anti-Semite, an idea MacDonald rejected. He said, "I have had quite a few discussions with you, and you almost never mention Jews, never in the general negative way." He was asked by the plaintiff if he perceived the Jewish community as working in a certain way in order to suppress a certain book, and responded in the affirmative, asserting there were several tactics that Jewish organizations have used. MacDonald was quoted as saying he was an agnostic in regard to the Holocaust, though he denied the accuracy of the quote. Now, I think there is a bit of an identity crisis with anti-Semites. There are anti-Semites who deny that they are anti-Semites, and I go, well, but you are. I know you don't like them and you talk about them in a certain way. But, what can you do? Either in their minds they think that they've got, they have a right to hate Jews, and I would support, that view, that we have the absolute right to hate whoever we like for correct or incorrect reasons. There's nothing you can do if somebody hates you for the wrong reasons. If they think you did something and you never did, you can't stop them anyway. And this is a right that the Quran guarantees. It's a statement of fact that there is no compulsion in religion. Truth stands clear from error. You can compel people to say things they don't mean for fear of punishment, but it doesn't change their belief. They might say something that they don't mean in order not to be punished, or not say something that they mean in order to escape punishment. And so I think people should be allowed to say what they mean. And if they really want to say it, then you have to let them say it, and then you have to let them defend themselves. I mean, that's the only way to resolve the situation. When you think, oh, well, they're saying this thing and it's obviously not true and it's dangerous and blah, well, then let them say it and then question them about it later. So unfortunately, with this nonsense about Holocaust denial, it has caused a lot of problems for Jews too, because people like to think that they're acting as a group in order to undermine the civilization of Gentiles. And it's actually very hard to disprove a negative. In the courts, there are certain concepts that I don't expect the layman to understand. Ideas such as the standard of proof and the burden of proof. But the burden of proof issue is this: should you, if you're accused of something, be expected to prove that you're innocent? Or should the accuser be made to prove your guilt? Obviously, it should be the other way. You should say, well, I think you did this because here is the evidence, A, B, C, whatever. Now, for those who've always hated Jews, I mean, they might not even in their own minds think that they dislike Jews, but they have a certain view of them, and they think, oh, they're all like this and they're all like that. Or they know not to say that they don't like Jews. They know not to say things to suggest that they think there's some Jewish conspiracy to, make Gentiles pass Holocaust laws against Holocaust denial. They might, just have enough self-awareness to not be obviously hostile to Jews, but they will just be saying these things. And you can tell by the way they talk about Jews, right? And, well, there's nothing you can do about it because they genuinely believe it, and you can't disprove them because, there are all these Jews, persecuting them and taking them to court and being mean to them and gloating at them, and, well, it's quite hard to prove the contrary. if the person's already, determined to believe that, they're being persecuted by Jews, and Jews have special privileges and they get away with, it's difficult to disprove the situation, this kind of view, because, you will be able to find Jews who are gloating, who are delighted, but on the other hand, you will, find Jews who are appalled by it. But then, the person who doesn't like Jews will be dismissing the Jews who are behaving well, and just concentrate on the ones who are criminal and malicious. So, it's a preference. You can decide, always to assume the guilt of someone, or be neutral about it, or assume the innocence until the guilt is proven beyond all reasonable doubt. Not that these anti-Semites, think these things through properly. It's just that they know what they feel. They want to say it, and they think they have the right to say it. And when they do say it, bad stuff happens. And that would be an opportunity for them to confirm that, yes, look at them, look at what they've done to me. Therefore, there is a Jewish conspiracy. I am being targeted by Jews who are gloating at my predicament. But I'm saying under secular Quranism, there would be no Holocaust denial laws. But then, the person in question won't support secular Quranism and won't help me propagate my message of secular Quranism. So, what? They're not really helping themselves. But then, they haven't been rational in the first place. But then if you say that they're irrational, they'll get angry with you. And then stop you from making your points, or pretend they don't understand your points, or be genuinely incapable of understanding your position, and then forbid you from speaking. So it's a very difficult situation. And the only way to do it properly is to well, the thing is, I was going to say, repeal all Holocaust denial laws, but the fact is, in the UK there are no Holocaust denial laws, but then the government decides to bring it in through the back door by using section 127 of the Communications Act, saying if something is grossly offensive, then you can go to prison for transmitting it through, electronically. So, I can't really do anything when people, refuse to follow the logic of undisputed facts. Or the moral imperative. So if you're in trouble over hate speech against the Jews, you do have a certain view of them. Clearly, otherwise, why would you mock Holocaust survivors, say things against Jews? You don't like them. Just admit that you don't like them, and you don't see why you can't say these things, because you think you have a right to. And so this is the politics of identity. And the politics of identity is really the politics of status. And then you can think, it's my country, I'm in the majority, but why can't I criticise Jews? They must be in power. They must have a status above us. And this means that there is a conspiracy. And this is something Jews don't like discussing. A lot of them haven't really thought it through. It's like, well, there's a law against it, so we should use it to shut people up who clearly hate us and might do what the Nazis did to us if we give them half the chance to organise. But this is the problem of living in a matriarchy where every question you ask is answered with a maybe. And in this opaque situation, well, you think, well, if it's maybe, then I'm going to think it's yes, there is a Jewish conspiracy. And there is no direction from on high. Nobody's really accountable. Nobody cares to state their position. They only want to keep their jobs, and it doesn't help for them to be too clear about things or to look too hard under too many rocks. So the position is that there are many people in the West who don't like Jews, and there are many immigrants, Muslims mainly, who don't like Jews either. And this makes Jews want the benefit of legislation that prevents Gentiles from declaring the hatred of Jews. But then that would have the effect of confirming in the minds of those who don't like Jews that Jews are indeed in control and run everything and hate them all. I think I can break that deadlock, and but I will first consider this book by Kevin MacDonald that I think is nonsense anyway. So obviously it's his first one. The Culture of Critique is better because it made more sense. It was coherent anyway. But we know the background of Kevin MacDonald. So, on his latest book, Origins, History and Prospects, Individuals and the Western Liberal Tradition, Evolutionary Origins, History and Prospects for the Future. So in the blurb it says, individualism in the Western liberal tradition argues that ethnic influences are important for understanding the West. Does it? I don't think it does. I mean, what does it mean? If the blurb is already so controversial and obscure, then, the whole premise of the book will be similarly obscure, and that was what I thought when I read the extracts of the book in Guide to Culture that nobody wanted to discuss with me. Okay, so that's what it says. Really? So it's thinking, the white man is individualistic, and that would be, because he's a liberal, right? Or a libertarian, and it's part of their political tradition to be like that. Okay, second sentence of the blurb. a bit of a long sentence, so it doesn't really fit in. All right, I'm going to put it in the description because I actually think it's important to examine the blurb, which is not okay. It's only one paragraph anyway, and these long sentences do not help the book, I don't think. I'll even give you the link to it in case you want to buy it. All right. Right. It's now posted so you can read it if you refresh. The prehistoric invasion of the Indo-Europeans had a transformative influence on Western Europe, inaugurating a prolonged period of what is labelled aristocratic individualism, resulting from variants of Indo-European genetic and cultural influence. You know, and where did that come from? So this seems to be echoing Jen Shah talking about the Indo-Europeans invading Europe. We don't know what aristocratic individualism is, you know, other than powerful people, barons usually, and barons would be warlords, would, you know, carve kingdoms for themselves. There's nothing particularly surprising about this. I'm sure that's how human civilizations develop. You know, you command your good leader, you get men to follow you, and you get these men to do stuff for you, and it's usually killing and robbing and getting you stuff, and then the women will come and you'll have a better chance of surviving than people who can't defend themselves against you. There's nothing surprising about this at all if you think of how human society must have developed. So the third sentence, and the final paragraph is the fourth paragraph. It says, however, beginning in the 17th century and gradually becoming dominant was a new culture labelled egalitarian individualism, which was influenced by pre-existing egalitarian tendencies of Northwest Europeans. Well, I don't know anything about that. Was it something? Did anybody learn about this period in European history in the 17th century? That would be the 1600s, when a new culture called egalitarian individualism. I mean, where did that come from? It's nonsense, isn't it? Okay, so what the 16th century, sorry, the 17th century would be the 1600s, right? So let us remember that people were still being burnt at the stake in the 1600s, right? I'll look up what it says. 16th century history. So I happen to know that Charles I lost his head, and Kevin MacDonald, being American, we'll have to talk about British history in the 16th century. So he's saying there's something called egalitarian individualism in the 16th century when Christians were still burning heretics at the stake, right? So sorry, 16th century. So that would be the 1500s. I'm so sorry. Sorry, 17th century would be the 1600s. Sorry, I'm looking at the wrong century. Silly me. That would be the age of Baroque. If you want to look at what European civilization looked like, it would be Baroque architecture. The 17th century was a century that lasted from January the 1st to December 1601 and December 31st, 1700. It falls into the early modern period of Europe, and in that continent, whose impact on the world was increasing, was characterized by the Baroque cultural movement, the latter part of the Spanish Golden Age, the Dutch Golden Age, and the French Grand Siècle. I can't pronounce it, I don't know. So anyway, okay, I'll pronounce it correctly for you. In French.
Grass check.
What?
Grass check.
Is that how it's pronounced? I don't think so. It means a great century anyway.
Grand Siècle.
That doesn't sound right either, does it? I don't think they should be doing this. Somebody should correct them. I think that this one's going to be better.
Grand siècle.
Right, Grand siècle. Right. The great century. So it was characterized by the scientific revolution, the reign of Louis XIV, the world's first public company and mega corporation known as the Dutch East India Company, and according to some historians, a general crisis. The general crisis is a term used by some historians to describe an alleged period of widespread global conflict and instability that occurred from the early 17th century to the early 18th century in Europe. But there were many wars. The greatest military conflicts were the 30 Years' War, the Great Turkish War, the Mughal-Safavid Wars, the Anglo-Mughal Indian War, the Dutch-Portuguese War. It was during this period that European colonization of the Americas began in earnest, including the exploitation of silver deposits, which resulted in bouts of inflation as wealth was drawn into Europe. In the Islamic world, the gunpowder empires, the Ottoman, Safavid and Mughal, grew in strength, especially in the Indian subcontinent. Mughal architecture, culture and art reached its zenith, while the empire itself, during the reign of Emperor Aurangzeb, is believed to have had the world's largest economy, bigger than the entirety of Western Europe and worth 25% of GDP. And its wealthiest province, the Bengal Suba, signalled the period of proto-industrialization. In Japan, Tokugawa Ieyasu established the Tokugawa shogunate at the beginning of the century, beginning the Edo period. The isolationist Sakoku policy began in the 1630s and lasted until the 19th century. In China, the collapsing Ming dynasty was challenged by a series of conquests led by the Manchu warlord Nuhachi, which were consolidated by his son Hong Taiji, and finally consummated by his grandson, the Shunji emperor, founder of the Jing dynasty. From the middle decades of the 17th century, European politics were increasingly dominated by the Kingdom of France, Louis XIV, where royal power was solidified domestically in the Civil War of the Fronde. The semi-feudal territorial French nobility was weakened and subjugated to the power of an absolute monarchy through the reinvention of the Palace of Versailles from a hunting lodge to a gilded prison, in which a greatly expanded royal court could be easily kept under surveillance. With domestic peace assured, Louis XIV caused the borders of France to be expanded. It was during the century that the English monarch became a symbolic figurehead and Parliament was the dominant force in government, a contrast to most of Europe, in particular France. By the end of the century, Europeans were aware of logarithms, electricity, the telescope and microscope, calculus, universal gravitation, Newton's laws of motion, air pressure, and calculating machines due to the work of the first scientists of the scientific revolution, including Galileo Galilei, Johannes Kepler, René Descartes, Pierre Fermat, Blaise Pascal, Robert Boyle, Christian Huygens, Anthony von Leeuwenhoek, Robert Hooke, Isaac Newton, and Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz. It was also a period of development of culture in general, especially theatre, music, visual arts, and philosophy. The grand century indeed. But I don't see how the Europeans were more individualistic than anyone else. Anyway, it's called the Grand Century because Europeans prospered, right? Or certainly French Europeans prospered under the reign of Louis XIV when he built the palace. Well, he extended the Palace of Versailles from a hunting lodge into a palace, so it was a big place, and he got all the nobility to come and live there so he could keep them under surveillance and under control and not be plotting revolution in their various corners of France. I imagine that was, what he was worried about. So it doesn't really make any sense what MacDonald is saying. Egalitarian Okay, so the final sentence is egalitarian individualism ushered in the modern world but may well carry the seeds of its own destructions. It's just so vague and so, it's just so hopeless. If you're going to make a theory of it, make a proper theory of it as Marx did, not this, may well carry, it's like, everything comes to an end. So, does he blame Jews or not? We don't know. But obviously these people in Guide to Culture think it's something to do with Jews, right? Because Kevin MacDonald has written a book about how Jews control everything. So it's his Culture of Critique series. So the Culture of Critique series is a trilogy of books. He basically claims that evolutionary psychology provides the motivations behind Jewish group behaviour and culture. Through the series, MacDonald asserts that Jews as a group have biologically evolved to be highly ethnocentric and hostile to the interests of white people. He asserts Jewish behaviour and culture are central causes of anti-Semitism and promotes conspiracy theories about alleged Jewish control and influence in government policy and political movements. So, 3 books he's written, called the Culture of Critique series. And I put the link in the description so you can see it more easily. So the trilogy includes A People That Shall Dwell Alone, Judaism as a Group Evolutionary Strategy with Diaspora Peoples, now this is easily explained as people, they're going to be a distinct people, right? We are Jews, we are not Gentiles, and we have to do our thing because we are God's chosen people, and we do follow different rules. The rules are harder than the rules for Gentiles, and that's because we are special and chosen, and, we are the people who set standards, right? That is basically the Jewish identity that some of them are embarrassed to talk about. It's like, we mustn't say we are God's chosen people because it triggers a Gentile, so we better not say it. And basically, the whole thing about, being Jewish is that, you gotta look after your fellow Jews, and we have to be nice to each other so that they know if we don't stand together, if we don't hang together, we will hang separately. I mean, this is not, just applicable to Jews only. It's for any group that seeks to obtain group solidarity, and you can only obtain group solidarity through stating what the group is for and following its rules. So Jews say, we are God's chosen people, he gave us rules to follow, and we had better follow them in order to retain our status and remain in existence. And, it's as simple as that, it's nothing particularly. I was going to say sinister, but obviously some of you will consider it sinister if you assume that the God who made Jews his chosen people is not a benevolent God. But Christians have been assuming that the Abrahamic God is a benevolent God. So the next one, the second in his trilogy, is called Separation and Its Discontents. So he examines institutionalized anti-Semitism. The first is the Roman Empire in the 4th century, the Iberian Inquisitions from the 14th century, and German Nazism in the 20th century, 1933 to 1945. He argues that anti-Semitism can be analysed as a consequence of resource competition between groups in which each group is rationally pursuing its own interests rather than a manifestation of irrational malice by non-Jewish outgroups, and asserts that Jews, particularly strongly identified Jews, will be relatively prone to self-deception by ignoring or rationalising negative information about themselves and their in-group. Well, that's wrong for a start, because Jewish identity is about, they don't like us. I mean, they do have they do have the single Tisha B'Av, which is basically about, asking themselves why are they hated. So, it's not something that they don't know about. They already know that they've been traditionally persecuted, in Rome because because they got kicked out of Israel, so they know about that. And then the Inquisitions, well, they know about that, and so should Christians know about that. But I'm not really sure if people even know about these things anymore. I mean, Westerners. Finally, he discusses whether Judaism has ceased to be an evolutionary strategy because of the current levels of intermarriage among the groups of diaspora Jews, arguing that it has not ceased to be so and that it continues to flourish. So at least he's being honest anyway, that Jews are these things, and it's like, oh, but they're not really supposed to marry out, but they are. So for the third and final book of his trilogy, he's saying that Jews dominate intellectual movements, something called Boasian anthropology. Okay, I don't know anything about that. It's somebody called Franz Boas. So what did he say? He's associated with cultural relativism, and I suppose because he's Jewish it will be assumed that he's malign. But all he's saying really is that cultures cannot be objectively ranked as higher or lower or better or more correct, but that all humans see the world through the lens of their own culture and judge it according to their own culturally acquired norms. And he's saying this as an anthropologist, and he's obviously an atheist, and it's like, yeah, he's a Jew, but he's an atheist, and he sees the world through this kind of lens. It's an atheist who say, well, we're just all people, aren't we? It's like, nothing's right, nothing's wrong. Some people believe God made laws, but I don't. And it's like, he's so lacking in I mean, this is so dumb. I mean, it's just really annoyed me now. So he doesn't know, as a Jew, that Jews are the world's most ancient and powerful tribe. And even if individual Jews say, oh, but I don't feel powerful, I'm not... I just feel persecuted by all these Christians. It's like, yeah, but, they only persecute you because they think you're powerful. because of your status. And all right, people will think, oh, we've heard this thing before, the grass is always greener on the other side. But, nobody can deny what I say. When I say Jews are the world's most ancient and powerful tribe, I know a few people who said, oh, have you heard of this tribe or that tribe? It's like, no, I haven't. I've never heard of them, and they're not powerful. So, then some people will say, oh, but Jews aren't a tribe. But that's how they think of themselves. They think of themselves as a tribe. And so the existence of Jews continues to trouble and infuriate the Gentile, because the Gentile is filled with anger and envy that such people should be presumed to be God's chosen people, and because they hate Jews so much, they reject the Abrahamic God. So, Jews have a lot to answer for, don't they? If the fact that they are what they are, that has caused Gentiles to reject the Abrahamic God, they should, examine their own behaviour, right? And this is how the discourse on anti-Semitism should turn towards, rather than these unprovable accusations that it's like, you would say that because you hate us. Kind of accusations that Kevin MacDonald would be saying. It's like, obviously, they have a religion, they have a moral system that confers on them status. So, even if you're a Jew and you don't want to follow the restrictions of being a Jew, you kind of like the idea that you're God's chosen people. And if Gentile governments say you can be Jewish and still be an equal member of our nation, then why wouldn't you grab it with both hands? But maybe the problem is that Gentiles are not in a position to emancipate Jews. Only God has that power to do it properly. So what Jews have then is their very distinctive identity, their higher status than Gentiles that drives Gentiles crazy, and which is why, that's why they're hated. So while Gentiles can only focus on, the wealthy, influential Jews whom they envy and hate, they don't care about the Jews who are poor and suffer some kind of tragedy or whatever. It's not part of the narrative that there are Jews who suffer terribly and who die poor. They don't care about those Jews because those Jews don't fit the narrative for Gentiles. And you can't really disprove it because it's always half and half. And Gentiles who want to make their identity anti-Semitism are not going to give it up because they don't want to admit that they've been wrong. They don't want to admit that if they've been anti-Semites for all their lives, they're not going to say, perhaps I was wrong. Particularly when they're atheists anyway. Because if you're an atheist, you would be denying God, and therefore you would be denying the whole narrative of, God making Jews his chosen people, and being omniscient and omnipotent, and you want to question God's decisions and choices, but that's only because you don't believe in his existence, and therefore you don't believe that he's right. You don't agree with Jews being made God's chosen people because you don't like them, and therefore you reject their God. what do you have as a Gentile that is more powerful than the Abrahamic God? You haven't got anything other than, pantheism, which is, interestingly enough, a creation of a secular Jew. Spinoza was a Jew who rejected the Abrahamic God and said, well, I don't want to live as a Jew. I want, I can imagine that, something must have created us, but it's not the Abrahamic God, and he didn't make us any laws, and I don't have to be Jewish, and I wash my hands of the whole affair of being Jewish. And that was basically what Spinoza's spiel was. But if Kevin MacDonald knew anything about Judaism, he would know that actually Jews are well aware of their history of persecution. Okay, the cultural critique is the most important one, because it's there that he makes, all these accusations against Jews. So he says that Jews, are the ones with the big idea, with all the big ideas of Boasian anthropology, political radicalism, psychoanalysis, of Frankfurt School, the New York intellectuals, arguing that Jews dominated these intellectual movements and that a strong sense of Jewish identity was characteristic of the great majority of individuals in these movements. He argues that these individuals were pursuing a Jewish ethnic agenda in establishing and participating in these movements, while writing that the Jewish community does not constitute a united movement, and that only a small and elite minority of that community participated in these movements. Alright? He claims that Jewish efforts to shape United States immigration policy were in opposition to what he sees as the interests of the people of non-Jewish European descent, particularly the peoples of Northern and Western Europe. So, well, is it true? Is it true that Jews shaped United States immigration policy, and were they doing it as Jews with a malign agenda, or did they think that they were liberals? Were they just sort of doing what Gentiles themselves wanted to anyway? Were they just being, the goody two-shoes by working harder at liberalism than Gentiles were? We can't tell. We will never know. He concludes the book by claiming that intellectual movements he examines are movements that are either, quote, Jewish, unquote, by nature, or Jewish controlled, with baleful results. The result has been a widening gulf between the cultural successes of Jews and Gentiles, and a disaster for society as a whole, unquote. So, MacDonald wrote in 2004, Understanding the Jewish Influence. So, according to him, these traits consist of hyper-ethnocentrism, high verbal intelligence and consequent wealth, psychological intensity, social and political aggression. What does psychological intensity mean anyway? This could be the traits of any ambitious person, right? Because if you're ambitious, you would want to join influential organizations, So you have influential people who will help you, and these people would be clever and wealthy and psychologically intense and socially and politically aggressive. So they'd be social climbers and active in political organisations seeking to be influencers. I mean, this is just all the traits of any ambitious person. He goes on to assert the influence of these traits upon current events concerning Zionism, neoconservatism, immigration, and Middle Eastern warfare waged by Western powers. Well, you could say, he could say that Jews influence American foreign policy, or they could be just servants of American imperialism. So which is it, chicken or egg? You won't be able to. You won't be able to say it. Prove your case conclusively. So Steven Pinker tried to address these accusations. And the thing is, he can't say, but no, Jews are not ethnocentric, because it's like, that's the whole thing about their religion. You look after your own. Well, then it's not an idea that's exclusive to Jews. And anyway, you won't be able to tell, why a Jew is doing something, and probably the Jew doesn't even know himself. Do you do these terrible things because you're Jewish, or in spite of being Jewish? Who can tell? So basically, Steven Pinker cannot successfully refute these accusations, because obviously lots of Jews are by following Judaism they would have to be ethnocentric and marry other Jews, and there are already Orthodox Jews who will take their religion seriously and try and follow their religion as best they can, and then you have the other half who don't care and marry out. But even that will cause problems, because if you marry out, well, obviously you're going to marry the wealthiest, most influential Gentiles, and then when you marry them and do well, you're going to be accused of running the world. But the easiest way of resolving the situation is through the theological narrative that I propose, which is that Jews have to follow the laws that God gave them, and if they don't, they're going to get punished. I mean, that is the narrative in the Old Testament, right? That's what they have to do. But, when you think about it, it's like, they're not that clever, really, because, okay, if I were Jewish, I would resent having to do all the things that they have to do, It's just a lot of fussing around and people thinking you're a bit weird, fussing over your food and all your festivals one after the other, and they're so high maintenance, right? Very high maintenance festivals, and, So I can understand it when, people want a sort of lighter form of being Jewish. And then of course, Reform Judaism was created, and it could be said that Jews are a victim of their own success, so they do well, and they become middle class and upper middle class, and they get into government, and they're overrepresented in the professions and academia. And this causes the Gentile to resent and envy him. creating more anti-Semitism. The thing is, if you're seen to influence anything, you're going to get the blame if things go wrong. And if you're in banking and government and law, when things go wrong, you're going to get the blame. So Jews really need to sort themselves out, and we can help them. We can help them, and maybe they'll be reasonable about their role. I'm trying to get them to engage, but obviously I won't have much influence if all these channels bigger than mine won't have me on to explain my ideas. So the problem with Jews and Gentiles in the West is that they're not capable of joined-up thinking because they don't really believe what they're supposed to believe in. And that is fundamentally the problem. So you have all these Jews who are not really sure that the chosen people, it's a sort of nice little story and they want to, they kind of want it, but they don't want the responsibility, and they, then when it gets too much, they basically sweep it under the carpet until, something happens, some anti-Semitic incident happens, and they worry a little bit, and but usually they just want to go with the mainstream and want to fit in, and if the culture is liberal and pro-immigration, they want to be like that too, because they don't want to stick out like a sore thumb. So a lot of them, I'm afraid, don't really follow their principles. And that is a problem. So if they don't follow their principles, and it would appear that Gentiles don't have many principles to follow other than the Muslims, and maybe the Muslims want to become like those Democrat voting Jews. Apparently 70% of Jews in America vote Democrat. Perhaps it's a bit like British Jews thinking that they have a future in Labour, and then discovering, that the working classes hate them. But then you would expect the pros to hate anyone above them. So, Jews being God's chosen people would just trigger the pleb, I mean, the plebs don't like any minority anyway. So, there's a lot of unacknowledged triggering points that are not being discussed. But by even Jews themselves, we know that there are, different kinds of Jews, and they don't agree with each other. They don't share the same premises. But I'm saying to Orthodox Jews that if they were ever made God's chosen people, then they were made for a purpose, and the purpose is to teach the Noahide laws, which they haven't done, and that's why they're being punished. But it's not too late. It's not too late to rank the 4 Gentile religions according to their conformity with the Noahide laws, and they won't do that because they're scared of Christians, because Christianity is the religion of idolatry and blasphemy, and Jews don't want to offend their Christian overlords. But then neither do Muslims, because Muslims don't talk about these things either, do they? Jews and Muslims, who should be talking about these things, don't talk about these things. They've left it all to me. They don't want to be seen to understand or support my ideas because, well, it might get them into trouble. So, Kevin MacDonald has written books that are, well, cultural critique is plausible, But then we also know that MacDonald is an atheist. Is there a problem with that? Well, yes, because we will not get the proper narrative that would impel the Jews to acknowledge that, they were supposed to do something and they didn't, and therefore they're being punished, and that's why the West is not what it should be. So for Westerners, the problem is immigration, and they're being prevented from complaining about it by Jews, they think. But really, the problem of the Western Gentile is the failure of Christianity and liberalism. But he doesn't want to acknowledge this because, well, why doesn't Jay acknowledge that Christianity is kaput? Why does he just keep going round and round in his revolving door? Because if you go back far enough in my streams, you will find that a few years ago he had no problem in agreeing with me that Christianity is kaput, and now he won't get it or he'll pretend not to get it. So he's saying Christianity as it is practiced now is kaput. Yeah, so how are you gonna make it work? He doesn't care. So and the thing is, he doesn't know his own history. He hasn't heard of the divine right of kings. And I'm sure a lot of other people don't really get it, don't really care. But if you're talking to people who don't even understand their own history, then, well, how can they correct themselves if they don't even accept the premise that you are relying on? So the premise that I'm relying on is that Christianity was used to support the divine right of kings. So what is a divine right of kings? Because he doesn't know what it is. And maybe quite a few morons and vegetables don't know what it is either. So this idea goes back a long time, back to the time of Constantine the Great, who needed some religion to support his divine right to rule. Because the emperor, the imperial cult to Rome was failing. And we know this because there was a lot of fighting between men who wanted to be Roman emperor. And that was obviously a sign of the Roman religion failing. The Roman religion was about worshipping the emperor, the deceased emperor. So a Roman emperor becomes divine when he's dead. And that's a pretty pathetic theory, isn't it? The Romans probably never thought that much of him to begin with. And, after he's dead, they're going to think even less of him. So obviously, he had to find a new religion. And, as far as the Greek pantheon was concerned, it didn't really work, did it? Because even the Greeks themselves doubted it. I mean, they were just, they were great stories, but they didn't really believe in it. So we know that the Greeks had their different cults. The women would have their, cult that would exclude the men. And the men would have their own, I guess, they would be drunken orgies, basically. And obviously it wasn't very good for the Greeks, and eventually they destroyed themselves, and then the Romans took over, and the Romans didn't really have much of a religion because they took their religion from the Greek pantheon. Perhaps for a while they were they had their patriarchy when men were in control. And then as they became more successful and conquering, they forgot about those early Republican virtues of family and patriarchy and marriage and that sort of thing. So eventually that broke down, and Christianity being lifted from some of the prohibitions in Judaism told Christians that they weren't to commit adultery and fornication and sodomy and incest. And so they didn't. Well, previously, Greeks and Romans practiced pederasty. So if Christianity did anything for Europeans, it was to raise the sexual standards of morality, standards of sexual morality amongst Europeans. And that enabled them to cooperate with each other to do a whole bunch of things. And it didn't matter that Christianity was an absurdity, because as long as marriage was practiced, European civilization would get better, would prosper, because of their greater technological and organisational superiority over other races and nations. I mean, isn't it obvious? And then for the past half century, Westerners haven't been protecting the practice of marriage, and that's why they are now suffering from degeneracy and matriarchy and dementia and amnesia. So basically, well, that's my critique of Western civilization. So I think Kevin MacDonald's book doesn't quite get it, does it? Because even the blurb doesn't make sense. It's about... So he's conflating in his latest book Christianity and liberalism. But really what he has failed to notice is that liberalism has actually replaced Christianity as the operating political orthodoxy. And liberalism, because it has no scripture, is in a constant state of flux. So our political classes are making it up as they go along, and because of the degeneracy that Westerners are suffering, because they no longer practice marriage, they're just becoming more incompetent and corrupt and neurotic, because they won't admit their own mistakes. But if they did believe in God, then it would be quicker for them to correct their mistakes, because they wouldn't be so arrogant, so stubborn, so dishonest. Because, from a position of humility, you would be more prepared to correct your mistakes. But anyway, what happens when you have a whole movement, who just, they like Kevin MacDonald because he doesn't like Jews, and they don't either, so they're just gonna go with him and follow him to the ends of the earth, right? Because these people haven't got a religion, they can only be motivated by their emotions, and their emotions are hatred and fear of Jews and Muslims. And they won't admit it because, not because I can't make them, I'm only one woman, right? And however cogent my arguments, however undeniable the facts that I'm relying on, they're going to say, well, you can't make us. We don't like it. We don't wanna. And, and most people, divine right of kings, what's that? So if they don't understand their own history and don't care to, then, well, it's impossible. It's impossible to make them understand anything. And, if there are no public intellectuals who are prepared to engage in a dialogue with me, I guess, and they're not going to because, they love their Anglicanism. Peter Hitchens, who's a Jew really because his mother's a Jew, is not going to talk to me because he's got this cushy job of being controlled opposition. And cushy jobs of being controlled opposition are very hard to come by. And he's not going to be knocked off the perch. He's not going to make way for me. So what he's going to do is just block me on Twitter and not talk about Christianity. Just like Douglas Murray, the people with jobs and, airtime, they are controlled opposition because they hate Islam. And they're not going to be discussing secular Quranism. But what about you people? Are you more likely to be moved by truth, logic, and morality? Or do you prefer your ancestral hatreds? How are you going to nurture honest voices? Well, I know you do, because Howard has been very helpful to me and very encouraging, but the people above me, the people with bigger YouTube channels, what's their problem? They can't talk to me? If my ideas are so stupid, then they should be inviting me on their channels to make a fool of me, right? But they're not doing it at all. So Dugin likes Boaz, does he? I don't know. Dugin hasn't got any idea either. I mean, all we know about Dugin is that he rejects liberal democracy, and quite right too, but he hasn't got a big idea that would work. He hasn't got a moral system. And I'm saying, yeah, well, secular Quranism with Russian characteristics, that would work. Connell's asked, how can a group that have been ethnically cleansed and forcibly converted ever be considered powerful? Well, they're still around, right? They're still around and apparently indestructible. So Amanda's popped up to deny the chosen status of Jews. But it's in the Torah. How can you deny that? No, is it in the Torah? Let me just check. Maybe it's just in the Tanakh. Apparently it's in Genesis chapter 12, verse 2. So let's go there. No, it says it's in the book of Deuteronomy. Well, perhaps I won't go there because it's going to be a bit complicated. Anyway, we know that that's what they think of themselves. So if they're chosen, then, well, if their book says they're chosen, then I guess that's what they think of themselves. We may not agree, but I think it works. It works for my narrative anyway. So if they're chosen, and they don't have to be good people to be chosen. They can just be, well, chosen and then made an example of and punished. And, unless you're so crazed with envy that you envy them, well, then if you envy them, then become one of them, right? You become one of them. It's open to you to do it. I don't know what Barry Bullock has been saying. Thank you for. I guess he must have been saying something rude. There's a lot of it going around. The kids refer to as main character, thinking the idea that everything is about you, and it's endemic. Well, it's a form of narcissism, isn't it? That people who basically say, okay, a good example would be the people that who say, well, I wouldn't do what you're doing, and therefore what you're doing is wrong. And I think, well, you don't have to do what I'm doing, but that doesn't mean what I'm doing is wrong. But the thing is, they think, oh, I don't like what you're doing and I wouldn't do it, and therefore what you're doing is wrong, and I'll do my best to destroy you because I hate your idea. And I would hate for you to succeed. That's basically how they think. That's narcissistic thinking. Because, you might think, well, I wouldn't want to do what they do, but maybe what they do is useful. Ralph, if you don't like if you don't like my content, you don't have to come here. Yeah, I kind of talk through my thoughts, and I find it helpful to get your responses in the chat to, expedite my conclusions. No, I haven't ordered any pizza today. Do they come in heart-shaped now? Do you have to pay extra for the heart-shaped pizzas? So Barry Baal is talking about the neocon wars. Well, American imperialism is fueled by war. Well, all empires become empires by through war. Well, economic migrants would be, well, kind of quasi-slaves. Barry Ball says, if people of the West protested about the wars as much as they do about COVID and lockdown measures, and maybe there wouldn't be so many wars and had so much mass immigration. Well, there was a big demonstration in 2003 in Hyde Park. Millions of people turned up. Let's have a look at that one. Peace demos, Hyde Park, Iraq. They just ignored it. It doesn't matter how many people turned up. So according to the BBC, million march against Iraq war. Well, they don't care. So it was in 2003, 15th of February. 2 million people demonstrated against Iraq war, but our ruling classes don't give a shit. They just want to do what America wants. And this is fundamentally what needs to be addressed. The actual status of this country, of Britain, which is a US vassal state. That's why the Americans are just doing what they're doing to Andrew. They're treating the UK like Florida or California. I mean, and the British don't even care as long as they can get Andrew, because they hate Andrew because they're not him, right? That's why they're so happy to see him fall. Because they're stupid and they don't get it, and they're more motivated by their hatred and envy of Andrew than any sense of national solidarity or any offence they might feel about being treated like Florida or California by America. Because they don't get it, right? And also, they're not going to defend one of their own, if they're ever accused of a historic sexual offence. Because actually they don't really care about each other, or they're too stupid to stand up for a principle, or maybe they don't even know what a principle is. So all you have to do is accuse some white man of historic sexual offence, and all his friends will just automatically, without even investigating the matter, abandon him and treat him as guilty. After all, that was what Mark Collar did to Colin, right? Millennial Rose was accused of being a sex predator or whatever it was. And Mark Collard immediately believed this woman and immediately kicked him out. And now Colin is still friends with Mark. It's like, hit me one more time. And I know what Mark's views on secular Quranism are, and Colin is afraid of Mark, right? I know these things. I'm not stupid. And when your enemies know how scared and stupid you are and how unprincipled, well, your stupidity and your cowardice will encourage them. And your stupidity and cowardice is demonstrated in your inability to engage with my ideas. So, academic agent, millennial woes, Ed Dutton. Yeah, I got those 3 now. Are infamous for their a lack of principle and lack of ability to discuss ideas and engage with my ideas, which are the only ones worth talking about. Really, nobody else has any idea. Okay, you're going to say, ooh, Kevin MacDonald, blaming the Jews again. It's not going to work, is it? But thanks for reminding me of the 2003 demonstrations. It's like, no, nobody cares. Nobody cares that we don't want war. Because, look, the media will chronicle the history. They'll say, we wanted it, we didn't care. And future generations will think we're weak and stupid. Gary Garner asks, why don't these migrants, refugees insist on coming to... Why do they insist on coming to the UK where they're safe in France, Spain, Italy, Germany, etc.? Because Britain has the... Well, they speak English. I think, it's like, oh, well, we speak English. We don't speak all these other European languages. We'd rather go to England and maybe there are more jobs here because maybe the people here are... Maybe the proles here are more useless. Yeah, Mama talks about... Yeah, I mean, the Vatican Museum is, well, it's a magnificent museum and it's all full of stuff looted from other countries. Yeah, so Barry Bile says, all these migrants want to come here because of the generous benefit system. So the simplest way, of the government dealing with a problem is like, they'll tell you, it's like, look, you proles. The only reason why we bring in all these people is because you're so fucking useless and nobody wants to hire you. They could say that, right? But they're afraid of losing votes. And why don't the anti-immigration party say that? Because... Well, Nick Griffin's not going to say things like that because then they'll walk out, won't they? So you're all being lied to for different reasons, obviously. So while you keep sacrificing your national interest to carry on promoting, propping up this democracy thing that you love so much, well, you're bleeding to death, aren't you? You're bleeding to death. So you have to say that, well, maybe representative democracy isn't working so well for us. But who's going to say that other than me? Not Academic Agent, not Millennial Woes, not Ed Dutton. None of them are prepared to say it. And if I say it, I'll say, ooh, she's a bit mad and radical, isn't she? They also get UBI in Germany, Diana was saying that. So I'm afraid, to kind of short circuit the whole thing, they have UBI. You don't want UBI because UBI pays people to sit at home and play video games. So I'm afraid you have to reintroduce slavery. And then you'll have another shit fit when you hear this, right? Because slavery is the best form of workfare. So you don't have to end up paying people to sit at home and get fat and whack to porn. You just make sure that, well, you haven't, you got nothing, you're potless. Well, then you'll have to be a slave just to be fed and housed. So off you go, and well, if you can't even sell yourself into slavery, if nobody wants your services as a slave, then well, you're just useless, aren't you? What would I do with people whose services nobody even wants, even as a slave? Well, they could be put into a kind of human zoo. And be made to explain themselves, explain their whole existence. So what's happening in the West is that you don't have a moral system. You don't have rules of behaviour towards each other, towards members of the opposite sex. You just get told all kinds of shit by the BBC, and the BBC has no rules, right? The BBC takes orders from the CIA. And the CIA runs global media, but you prefer to blame Jews. You think it's far more likely that the Jews control media than the CIA. What's wrong with you? And if there are any Jews, they would just be servants of American imperialism. Oh, you're very welcome, Barry Ball. You're saying sensible things about bad parenting. It's the most degenerative factor of all, bad parenting. And if you want to retain your national identity, then well, the people in your country will have to do their own dirty work, right? I don't know what you're asking me. John Williams, SK for the Chosen Few, or double standard. You can't even write a proper sentence. Obviously, secular Quranism would apply to all. It'll be a moral and a legal political system, and it would have general application. So something has happened. I'm saying it's a failure of Christianity, and it's been failing for centuries, and you haven't acknowledged it because your political classes don't want, well, Okay, I suppose the problem with your religion failing is that you don't want to admit it until you can't deny it anymore. And I'm not saying that the British are unique in this. People just don't know what to do, right? And I guess they keep closing their eyes and looking the other way, hoping what they think is happening isn't really happening. But I'm telling you what the problem is, and you can't deny it. So I expect people who claim to care about their country, people who call themselves ethno-nationalists, to be able to discuss my ideas and dismiss them if they can, instead of pretending I don't exist and their itty-bitty little mentions of my ideas is sort of enough to get things going. No. I know they occasionally echo my ideas, particularly the one about, maybe we can, go to the elites with our ideas of nationalism. Yeah, that's my idea. I wanted to sell secular Quranism directly to the political classes, but, is there anyone in charge of the political classes? I don't think so. All right, I think I've said enough. Have I been clear enough? Have I? I think so. All right.